Well, good afternoon. We are really pleased to follow that great presentation by the Minister of Food Security. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the UAE is one of the few countries that actually has a Minister of Food Security reporting to the highest levels of government. And so I think
Thanks for
the
coming to
minister deserves another round of applause from all of us for her work. So let's just jump right into this. Let's start with you, Peter. And I'm not going to use our time to introduce our panelists. Their biographies are in your materials. But we will start with Peter Portman from the Netherlands. Peter, what do you believe, listening to the ambassador, I'm sorry, the minister, what are the most urgent next steps towards establishing food security around the world? And what role does trade, both global and regional, play, if any, in addressing those challenges of food security?
Well, thanks for that question. And good afternoon to everybody. If you allow me to briefly start with applauding the speech by Her Excellency Al-Mahdi, because I think it's another example, and this is my second day in the country, so I have to be modest here, but another example of the pioneering spirit that I find in this country, which is a relatively young state, but which is so ambitious that they want to be in the top 10 of everything within 2 years, so by the time of their 50th anniversary. And that is a spirit that I think the world needs at large. To come back to your question, your 2 points, what is urgent? Well, I think the good news is that at present, in principle, there is enough food in the world. It's just 1/3 of it goes to waste, so that is an urgent problem we should tackle. And with climate change and a growing population, if we stay on track like we're doing now, there won't be enough food in 10 or 20 years from now. So we have to step up our efforts. So the Netherlands is a country, presently we are the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world, only after the United States. The Netherlands is about geographically the same size as the United Arab Emirates. So it's not a very big place, but it's a place where we put technology to good use. So I think that is the second point that I would like to mention is what we have to do, is that we have to use technology to the max. And my country, for one, and the companies from my country, some of which are here in the room, and that are collaborating with the United Arab Emirates, is ready to play its part in that development. Thirdly, I would say, as I said, the climate change problem, of course, is making everything even more urgent. Because the prime problem here, I think, is rising temperatures, but also a lack of fresh water that we're facing. So we have to address that, and it makes it necessary that we should get more crop for a drop, and that also involves technology. The third thing I should say is that we have to transit towards, and that brings me also to your point of trade, and then I'll wrap up. Is that we have to become more circular in our approach. And this is something that sounds logical perhaps, but in a country like the Netherlands, at present, is a huge challenge because the system that we have developed is basically based on growth and on exporting produce. That's not very circular. So we, even being the second largest exporter in the world, will have to change our ways in order to save the climate in our own country. And so let me briefly touch upon your point of trade. I think it means that in order to have a sustainable agricultural production, trade will have to change. And so what I foresee in decades to come is that there will be less trade in produce, but there should be more trade in technology and in services and in knowledge. The closer we can produce to the source, or to the market, I should say, the more sustainable it will be. And so to give you one example, just today there was a contract was signed between a Dutch company in horticulture. We saw a picture actually in the presentation of the minister. And our host today, Masdar company, no, so it was Mother company, so it's not the host, but a big agricultural company here in this country to help the UAE to set up its own production facilities for their own food security. So I think that is the future as far as we see it. We want to play our role. It will have a profound impact on how we are doing business, but I believe this is the way to go. So let me stop there for a moment.
Well, thank you very much. Let me turn to you, Jürgen. As someone who's spent your entire career focused on science-based action to promote food security, how do we ensure that research, development, science deliver food security solutions that are universal, that we leave no one behind? And what role do food safety standards play in ensuring that universal access to not just nutritious food, but safe food as well?
Yeah, I think it's an important point that we have to link these things together, like you mentioned. But first, I'd like to say that there is a general misunderstanding, I think, in general population that it's very difficult for us to produce enough food to the whole world. And when we become 10 billion, we cannot produce enough food. This is totally wrong. Nobody who's working in the area would say that. There is no science to base that on. We have clearly the capacity to produce enough food also for 10 billion. There's no question about that. The real issue is, can we do that in a sustainable way? That's the real issue. And that's why we have to have these discussions. Now then, the third problem that I see here is that we don't have a very good international agreement about how do we measure sustainability. So if we cannot measure something, it's very difficult to say if we're doing something better than before. I know that some of these companies will produce new shoes and say, these are sustainable, but how do they measure sustainability? If we don't have agreement of how we measure that, we cannot have a global movement towards something. And that's where we can link it to food safety, because food safety, there's been international agreement for a very, very long time how we do that. We have, first we get the scientists, and in international level, that is the World Health Organization together with the Food and Agriculture Organization. They invite scientists to discuss a certain area so that we can define the science, and then you get the countries together in the Codex Alimentarius Commission, and then they set international standards. And that's been going on for at least 50 years. It's not perfect, like anything is not perfect, but really that is a way to do it, and that means that we are doing things in the food safety area in a science-based way. We should really try to see how we can actually have also a science-based discussion about sustainability and how we can agree how we measure it so that we can move forward like that.
So Peter says we already have the capacity to feed the world. You say we can feed not just the world today, but 10 billion. Omar, let me come to you and ask you the question of, then what role does the private sector play in shaping and ensuring that capacity to meet the needs of the global needs of a growing population for food security? And how do we move beyond just talking about partnerships with private sector to actually implementing partnerships that are cooperative and that actually create change?
Well, the private sector plays a big role, and there are different partnerships that are required to ensure the success of this industry. So we'll start, for example, with the commercial partnerships with distributors or big hotel chains where they could come in and mandate for distributors, for example, to buy our products that are locally produced, that are sustainably grown, to support this industry, to ignite it. Another partnership would be with the technical partners, farmers from around the globe, where we could build on their know-how. Yes, our region has different climate, but we don't have to start from scratch. Partnerships with technology providers, automation, robotics, AI, irrigation systems, and lastly could be fund or capital providers. And we need to give investors, how does our industry operate, what type of returns do they expect, and the role they are playing to jumpstart it in this region and around the globe. And how do we implement? We need to move on from just signing MOUs and wanting to show that we are committed to sustainability. I mean, investors need to really start investing. Hotels or distributors sign actual contracts with us, with small companies that just started, until we are sustainable and we could grow on our own. So just they need to start taking that extra step, have faith and take that extra step to support us.
So Thomas, I'm going to put you on the spot after that statement, where he says the private sector needs funders to come in and support businesses. So as a financier, as a fund manager, what role should finance play in ensuring that we create a more food secure world?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There has to be enough funds in order to enable the change that is there. I think we have the intellectual capacity as human beings to evolve in a way that food security becomes sustainable. You just need the money to do it. And government can play a role only so much to set the legislative framework and bring some money in to enable the change. But in order to really scale it to the grand scale, you need investors from the private sector to do this. And you do it for two reasons, essentially, as an investor. You support exciting new companies to help young entrepreneurs succeed. That has got to be a goal that is not financial. The other goal is obviously there's got to be a return on investment, because my stakeholders are my investors. And as we look at new markets, the food tech, the ag tech sector, all the sectors that were talked about are much talked about these days. And what that only means is that you're talking about it today, people will slowly start to adopt, so the markets will continue to increase. So there's a natural expansion of a market for healthy, sustainable food, food security, food that is more environment friendly, to really help that market grow. And when a market grows, we as investors make money, and the ones that are in there early take the most risk, but also have the potential to earn the most. So we take that risk. We help young entrepreneurs. We're not afraid of failure. And we think that, when you look at food security, if you don't have food security in the world, I believe you don't have any security at all, because food is survival, and we will have wars if food security is not ensured. So in a way, you're doing good. In a way, you're creating a return for investors, and we've seen that through some of our investments already.
So Tatiana, building on what Thomas was just saying about food security as security and creating stable, sustainable food system, we use this word sustainable. What do we mean when we talk about a sustainable food system, and how do we ensure that food system address not just the challenge of food insecurity, but also meet the challenges of sustainability?
The first thing is, when we're looking at sustainability, we have to understand that every part of food security does have an impact towards sustainability. So growing, the storage, the amount of power it takes to store, heating, cooling systems, etc., are something that we really need to look at. To go with what you're saying, Rudy, and I really think that this is important, is that actually it's something that companies really need to understand, is that making those investments now is what's going to help us all in the future, because we do need to look at it today for our future. In terms of sustainability, one of the big things that we see is food waste and what we can do with the amount of food waste. We're talking about nearly 700 billion per year in food waste. That is a lot of waste, and it's something that I know those funds could be happily used elsewhere. So now it's time to talk about the investment and the return on investment. We have to look at that as well. people are happy to make sacrifices, but again, if it touches their purse, in the end, it's not the best attitude to have. So return on investment, how do we make something out of this food waste? It's going to waste. There are culturally, and our minister said to us at the beginning that it's nice to have and show how welcoming you are by having a lot of food on the table. And that's something that we should look to change. But in the meantime, that still goes to waste. And we need to make money out of that waste. And we need to not just send more greenhouse gases into the system, into the atmosphere, and actually have something to do with the end product.
So, Peter, if I can come back to you again. Based on the responses that you've heard from the other panelists, whether it's partnerships or issues related to waste or providing the space for investments, what are the public policies that government should look to implement that will support this type of activity that have been described by the panelists?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. And you know, one is that the example that the minister gave us is that every country should do this. I mean, you should have a 10-point strategy and you should have a clear goal after you've made a thorough analysis of the situation in your country. My country and my government has gone through the same exercise and is actually still going through that in defining where we want to be with our agricultural and food policy in 10 years from now. And as I said earlier on, this is painful because you go into vested interests. You have to really change a system, and it leads to a lot of political acrimony that you have to go through. So that's number one. The other thing that comes to mind is both nationally but also internationally, the crux, I think, in the end is on people, which is education. Because in large parts of the world, you still have subsistence farming. And as I said, the whole world will have to move up technologically. Then you have to have the people that have the skills to be able to do that. I was discussing with a big investor in this country. Suppose we're going to invest heavily, or they're going to invest heavily with our technology in this country to move up food production. You still need the people and the companies and the expertise to handle such a system. They may not necessarily be there right now. So I think there is an urgent need, and that needs public policy to tackle the issue of education that we need on a global scale to be able to move to that level. So thirdly, and this is international cooperation, we have the systems, you worked at FAO and WFP. So in the UN framework and other international bodies that may exist, we'll have to agree on sustainability standards. We have to share ideas. We had the conference on IRENA this week. Where again you can share sustainability technologies and ideas, etc. So we have to, through public policies and international cooperation, educate the whole system, bring us to the next level, agree on concepts that we need to get there. Because we're sitting here, everything we say, I don't think there will be disagreement in the room. It's just that how do we get from A to B? This is the big question. And therefore, I think we need public policies, and then we need private enterprise. We need innovative companies, that are going to be found by Thomas and his friends in order to provide them with the right investment. So that they can bring this about. So the issue is we have enough food, we can produce enough food for 10 billion people. It's just that we have to adapt the entire system through public policy. This is not something private industry can do. So those are a couple of elements that I think we have to take on urgently.
Listening to the responses of the panel today, it would seem that the challenges of food security and malnutrition, we can overcome them. But to date, we know that food insecurity and now the triple burden of malnutrition have been almost intractable. And so I'd like to ask each one of you in our less than 5 minutes that we have left to give me in 5, no more than 10 words, is universal food security and nutrition achievable? And if so, what's the one priority issue that we should move forward? Starting with you, Omar.
5 words?
No more than 10.
It's achievable, and it requires win-win cooperations among us all, different industries globally.
It's achievable and requires cooperation amongst the different industry. Jürgen.
Yeah, it's absolutely, in my opinion, it's absolutely achievable. The real problem is distribution at the moment. We produce definitely enough food already at the stage, and we can easily increase that. But I still remain with that we're talking about sustainability, and we still don't know how to measure it. And we have to have international agreement about that, or else it doesn't really work, in my opinion.
More than 10 words, but that's good. So, Tatiana, is it?
I think it's achievable, absolutely achievable, but I think we must not let it go at the expense of sustainability because we still need the world to exist, even if there is enough food.
So how do you answer the question that Jürgen raised, though, of how do we measure sustainability?
It is a very good question, and it does need to be measured, and I do believe there should be legislation in place. Legislation in place not only for measuring, but also what we do with food and the waste thereof, and also how we store it, because you're right, the distribution is a major issue as well.
So, Thomas, is it achievable? And if so, what's the priority issue that we should address?
I put my money in it, so I have to be optimistic. So yes, it is achievable. I think we just have to be smart in our choices on where to put our money for the investment to both meet our short-term and long-term goals and not compromise on that, on both.
So it is achievable, and we need to look at short-term and long-term goals. Mr. Minister. Or Deputy Minister, shall I say. I raise everyone's level. So
Well, this is a great American tradition, but
it is a great American tradition. Move.
I would say yes, innovation, education, cooperation. So that's 4 words.
Innovation, education,
Cooperation.
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 Cooperation. And to each one of you, I would ask you, starting again with you, Omar, innovation, education, cooperation. Of those 3, which is the most intractable, and how do we, or can we, achieve all 3 of those? Innovation, education, cooperation.
I mean, innovation is there. We'd have to educate and cooperate.
And so you think we can do it?
Absolutely, we can do it. We just need to have the right platform and really come up with these win-win situations where a farmer from the US or from Holland wants to come and work with us on developing these vertical farms, for example, in the UAE. But they have to get something out of it in return as well. So it's building that alliance.
Jürgen, innovation, education, cooperation.
Definitely education. And we should probably not have scientists involved in that education, because if we look at the disaster of trying to educate the public about genetically modified organisms, which was basically caused by scientists not being able to explain something relatively simple, especially in Europe, of course, because Europeans are generally the most stupid. But in the end, we should really have some education based on real data, and I also think on an agreed way of measuring sustainability, or else it doesn't matter.
Tatiana, innovation, education, cooperation.
Oh, it's cooperation for me. It's 100% cooperation. No man is an island. We all rely on each other to do various parts. And I think that the more that we can work together in terms of, it could be investment, but it could also be in terms of the education part, I think that we're going to be sort of more into this. So that for me, it's definitely the cooperation side. I think it's important.
And Thomas.
Well, my company is called Elevate Innovation Partners, so it's got to be innovation for me. But if you look at the sectors of food tech, ag tech, technology, and food security overall, we live in an absolutely exciting time. The privilege I have to look at young companies that have really innovative solutions is abundant. We just, again, have to make the right choices. I'm happy to talk to each one of you later on about the investments we make and the companies we focus on. That would be too long for this panel, unfortunately.
So with innovation, education, cooperation, we can achieve a food secure world. But with finance, we must ensure that it's universally achieved and so that the furthest behind are brought forth first, and that sustainability means more than just the word, that we measure it in a way that provides the impact that is necessary to create food security, but in a way that protects our planet as well as makes profit and supports our health. With that, thank you all very much. We have come to the conclusion of our panel, and I thank you all for joining us, and please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak. Thank you.